My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the tent pole. The sun was disappearing behind the Canadian Rockies, and with every passing minute, the sky was turning from orange to purple to something that looked like the end of the world. Sienna was laughing at me, actually laughing, while I stood there looking like I was about to have a complete breakdown in the middle of nowhere. "Mackenzie, it's just darkness," she said, that infuriating smile on her face. "Everyone experiences it." But she didn't understand. Nobody ever understood. The darkness wasn't just darkness for me. It was suffocation. It was every nightmare I'd ever had, every shadow that had ever made my heart race, every irrational fear that had convinced me since childhood that something terrible was waiting in the black. And now, at 24 years old, I was about to spend an entire night in the Canadian wilderness with nothing but a tent, a flashlight, and the person who knew exactly how to get under my skin. What I didn't know then was that this weekend would change everything. That Sienna's promise, "I'll hold you all night long," meant so much more than just physical comfort. That the real darkness I was afraid of wasn't the absence of light at all. Subscribe to the channel and watch new videos every day. The whole thing started 3 weeks before that camping trip, on a completely ordinary Tuesday at the coffee shop where Sienna and I had been meeting since university. We were both 24, both stuck in that weird limbo between who we thought we'd be and who we actually were. She was working as a graphic designer, living in a small apartment in Vancouver, and I was doing freelance writing from my bedroom, which my mother constantly reminded me wasn't a real job. "You need to get out more," Sienna said, stirring her oat milk latte with unnecessary aggression. "You're becoming a hermit. A pale, anxious hermit who's afraid of literally everything." "I'm not afraid of everything," I protested weakly. "I'm afraid of specific things, like the dark, and spiders, and disappointing people, and—" "Okay, so you're afraid of everything," she interrupted, but she was smiling. That's the thing about Sienna. She could say the most cutting things and somehow make them sound like love. We'd been best friends since first year of university, when she'd sat next to me in a communications class and immediately started making fun of the professor's terrible toupee. She had this way of making the world feel smaller, more manageable. When I was with her, my anxiety didn't completely disappear, but it felt like something I could actually handle instead of something that was handling me. "There's a camping trip next month," she said suddenly, pulling out her phone to show me pictures of a place called Emerald Lake, nestled in the Canadian Rockies. "My cousin has a cabin nearby. It's going to be amazing. Mountains, fresh air, starlight so bright you can see the Milky Way." "No," I said immediately. "You didn't even let me finish." "I don't need to. The answer is no. Camping means darkness. Darkness means panic attacks. Panic attacks mean I'll ruin your trip and probably traumatize myself in the process." Sienna leaned back in her chair, studying me with that expression she got when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear but needed to. "Mackenzie, you're 24 years old. You've been letting this fear run your life for as long as I've known you. You won't go to movies unless they're matinees. You won't stay at anyone's house unless they have night lights in every room. You literally sleep with your bedroom light on." "It's not that bad," I lied. "It is that bad. And I'm tired of watching you disappear into your own fear." The thing was, she wasn't wrong. My phobia of the dark, nyctophobia, I'd learned from excessive Googling, had started when I was 7 years old. My older brother had locked me in the basement as a prank, and I'd spent what felt like hours in complete darkness, convinced that every sound was a monster, every shadow was something that wanted to hurt me. By the time my parents found me, I was hyperventilating so badly they thought I was having an asthma attack. I'd been running from that moment ever since. "What if I promise you something?" Sienna said, and there was something in her voice that made me look up from my coffee. What if I promise that you won't be alone in the dark? What if I promise to stay with you the entire time? I'll hold you all night long if that's what it takes. But you have to try, Mackenzie. You have to at least try to face this. I wanted to say no. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to refuse. But there was something else there too. Something that had been growing stronger over the past few months. Something I'd been desperately trying to ignore. Something that made my heart race faster when Sienna laughed. That made me notice the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. That made me volunteer to pick her up from work, even though it was completely out of my way. I was in love with my best friend, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Okay, I heard myself say. Okay, I'll go. Sienna's face lit up like I'd just told her she'd won the lottery. Really? Really? But if I have a complete mental breakdown in the middle of the forest, I'm blaming you for the rest of our lives. Fair enough, she said, reaching across the table and squeezing my hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it sent electricity through my entire body. This is going to be good for you, I promise. What she didn't know was that the darkness outside wasn't what terrified me anymore. It was the darkness inside myself. The part of me that was falling deeper and deeper for her with every passing day, and the absolute certainty that if she ever found out, everything would change. Our friendship would shatter. I'd lose the most important person in my life. That was the real fear. That was the darkness I couldn't escape. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation and internal panic. Sienna took her promise seriously, which meant she was constantly checking in on me, sending me articles about conquering phobias, and even suggesting that I see a therapist, which, fair enough, was probably good advice that I completely ignored. We went shopping together for camping gear, and I found myself hyper-aware of every moment. The way she'd hold up a sleeping bag and ask my opinion. The way she'd laugh when I suggested we buy one of those inflatable light-up bears because it's basically a nightlight for the outdoors. The way her shoulder would brush against mine as we walked through the store, and I'd have to pretend that my heart wasn't doing backflips. "You're being weird," she said one afternoon, about a week before the trip. We were at my apartment and she was helping me pack. Weirder than usual, I mean. "I'm not weird," I said, shoving clothes into my backpack with more force than necessary. "I'm nervous about the camping trip." "You're nervous about the dark," she corrected. "But that's not why you're being weird. You've been weird for, months. Ever since that time at the beach when you got sunburned and I had to help you with sunscreen, and you literally couldn't look at me for an hour. My face went completely red. I was just embarrassed about the sunburn." "Uh-huh. And what about when we went to that concert and you cried during the slow song? And then you wouldn't tell me why." "The song was emotional," I said defensively. "The song was terrible. It was that guy from that reality TV show, and he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket." She was watching me carefully now, and I could feel myself starting to panic. "Mackenzie, is everything okay? Actually okay? Because sometimes I feel like you're keeping something from me, and it makes me worried that—" "Everything's fine," I interrupted, maybe a little too quickly. "I'm just stressed about the trip. That's all." She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. That was another thing about Sienna. She knew when to push and when to back off. She knew me better than I knew myself sometimes, which was both comforting and absolutely terrifying. 2 days before we left, my mother called. This was never a good sign. "Your brother told me you're going camping," she said, her voice already tinged with disapproval. "In the dark, in the wilderness, with bears." "There probably won't be bears," I said, even though I definitely thought about bears. A lot. Mackenzie, you know how you get in the dark. Why would you put yourself through that? You know your anxiety. Mom, I have to do this. Why? Why do you have to do this? Because I'm in love with my best friend, and I'm terrified that if I don't start facing my fears, I'll spend the rest of my life hiding from everything, including my own heart. Because Sienna believes in me, and I need to believe in myself. Because sometimes you have to walk into the darkness to find the light. Because Sienna asked me to, I said simply, and because I need to. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Is she more than a friend to you? My entire body went rigid. What? No. She's my best friend. Mackenzie, I have to go, Mom. I'll call you when we get back. I hung up before she could say anything else, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Had I been that obvious? Could everyone see what I'd been so desperately trying to hide? That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying every interaction with Sienna, analyzing every word, every touch, every moment. Was there any chance she felt the same way? Or was I just setting myself up for heartbreak? By the time Sienna picked me up the next morning, I was running on anxiety and coffee, and I probably looked like I'd been hit by a truck. Rough night? She asked, pulling onto the highway that would take us toward the mountains. Couldn't sleep, I admitted. Nervous about the dark? Among other things. And she reached over and squeezed my knee, and I had to grip the door handle to keep from doing something stupid like grabbing her hand and never letting go. I've got you, she said simply. Whatever happens out there, I've got you. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that her promise meant something deeper than just keeping me safe from the darkness. But I was too afraid to ask, too afraid to risk everything on the chance that maybe, just maybe, she felt the same way. The mountains were getting closer with every mile, and with them, the darkness I'd been running from my entire life. But as I watched Sienna drive, completely focused on the road, completely unaware of the way I was looking at her, I realized that the real darkness I was afraid of wasn't the night sky at all. It was the possibility of losing her. Emerald Lake was exactly as beautiful as the pictures had promised. The water was this impossible shade of turquoise, reflecting the snow-capped peaks of the Canadian Rockies like a mirror. The air was crisp and clean, and there was this overwhelming sense of peace that I'd never experienced in the city. For about 30 seconds, I forgot to be anxious. Then the sun started to set. Sienna's cousin's cabin was small but cozy, with huge windows that faced the lake. We'd arrived around 2 in the afternoon, which gave us several hours of daylight to settle in and explore. Sienna was in her element, pointing out hiking trails and planning our meals, and generally being the most organized person I'd ever met. I was trying to stay present, to enjoy the moment, but I could feel the anxiety building in my chest as the shadows got longer. We should go for a walk before it gets dark, Sienna suggested around 5 o'clock. There's a trail that goes around the lake. It's supposed to be incredible. How long? I asked, already calculating how much daylight we'd have left. Maybe 45 minutes. We'll be back before sunset. We weren't back before sunset. We were about 30 minutes into the walk when Sienna spotted a family of deer, and she got so excited that she insisted we follow them to get better pictures. By the time we realized how late it was, the sun was already touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that were almost painfully beautiful. We should head back, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Just a little further, Sienna said, completely oblivious to my rising anxiety. Look at how the light is hitting the water. It's like liquid gold. She was right. It was beautiful, and it was also disappearing at an alarming rate. By the time we made it back to the cabin, the sky had shifted from purple to a deep indigo, and the first stars were starting to appear. Sienna was chattering about the deer and the hike, and how amazing it was to be out in nature, completely unaware that I was having a full-body panic attack. "Let's make a fire," she said, pulling out supplies from the cabin. "We can sit outside and watch the stars come out. It'll be romantic." Romantic. She'd used that word so casually, but it hit me like a physical blow. Did she mean it that way? Or was she just using it to describe the setting? I helped her build the fire, my hands shaking slightly as I arranged the wood. The flames started small, then grew larger, casting dancing shadows across the clearing. For a moment, I felt okay. The firelight pushed back the darkness, created a small circle of safety in the vast wilderness. "Come sit," Sienna said, patting the spot next to her on the log. I sat, and our shoulders touched. She didn't move away. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I know this is hard for you." "How did you know I'd say yes?" I asked. "When you first suggested it, you seemed pretty confident that I would." She was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Because I know you, and I know that you're braver than you think you are. I also knew that I really, really wanted you here, with me." My heart stopped. "Why?" "Because you're my best friend. Because I care about you. Because—" She trailed off, and I could see her jaw tightening. "Because I wanted to help you face this fear. And because I wanted to spend time with you away from the city, away from all the noise and distractions." It wasn't a confession, but it wasn't nothing either. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the sounds of the forest. Crickets chirping, the gentle lap of water against the shore, the occasional crack of a branch in the distance that made my anxiety spike. "Tell me about your fear," Sienna said eventually. "Not the clinical stuff. The real stuff. What does the darkness feel like to you?" I'd never really talked about it with anyone, not in a real way. But sitting there with Sienna, with the fire creating this small island of light in the darkness, I found myself opening up. "It feels like suffocation," I said quietly, "like the world is closing in on me, and I can't see what's coming. It feels like I'm 7 years old again, locked in that basement, convinced that something terrible is about to happen. It feels like I'm not safe, like I'm completely alone." "You're not alone," Sienna said, and she reached over and took my hand. "You're never alone, not as long as I'm here." "Promise?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "I promise. I'll hold you all night long if that's what it takes." The fire was dying down now, the darkness creeping closer with every passing minute. In a few hours it would be completely black outside. The thought made my stomach clench with fear. "We should go inside," Sienna said, standing up and pulling me with her. "We can make hot chocolate and watch a movie or something." But as we walked toward the cabin, I realized something. The darkness was still terrifying. My fear hadn't magically disappeared just because Sienna had promised to stay with me. But somehow, knowing that she was there, that she cared enough to keep that promise, made it feel a little bit more bearable, a little bit more survivable. We ended up staying up until almost midnight, sitting on the cabin's porch with blankets wrapped around us, drinking hot chocolate and talking about everything and nothing. Sienna told me about her childhood, about the time she'd gotten lost in a shopping mall and had been terrified until her mother found her. I told her about my dreams, about the novel I'd been trying to write for 3 years, but never seemed to finish. "Why don't you finish it?" she asked. "Because I'm afraid it's not good enough. I'm afraid that I'll put my heart into it, and people will hate it. I'm afraid of failing." "You're afraid of a lot of things," she said, but there was no judgment in her voice. "But you know what I think? I think you're one of the bravest people I know. Because you're afraid, and you do things anyway. That's not brave. That's just necessary." "No," she said, turning to face me. "Brave is when you're terrified and you do it anyway. Brave is when you're afraid of the dark and you go camping in the Canadian wilderness. Brave is when you're afraid of disappointing people and you still try to write your novel." I wanted to tell her that I was afraid of something else too, that I was terrified of what I felt for her, of the way my heart raced when she smiled, of the possibility that she might never feel the same way. But I couldn't find the words. Around midnight, we decided to go to bed. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, and I'd assumed I'd sleep in one while Sienna slept in the other. But as we were getting ready, she appeared in my doorway with her pillow and blanket. "I'm sleeping in here," she said simply. "You're not spending the night alone in the dark. Sienna, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." She set up her sleeping bag right next to my bed, and I felt a complicated mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because I genuinely didn't know if I could handle a full night alone in the darkness. Disappointment because I wanted more than just her presence. I wanted her to want to be close to me for reasons that had nothing to do with my phobia. "Good night," she said, turning off the lamp. The darkness was absolute. There were no streetlights out here, no ambient glow from the city. It was the kind of darkness I'd been running from my entire life. Complete, total, all-consuming. My breathing started to get shallow. My heart rate picked up. The panic was starting to claw its way up my throat. "Mackenzie?" Sienna's voice came through the darkness. "Are you okay?" "No," I admitted. "I'm not okay." There was a rustling sound, and then she was climbing into bed with me, pulling me against her chest. I could feel her heartbeat, steady and calm, against my back. She wrapped her arms around me, and I held on to her like she was the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. "Just breathe," she whispered into my hair. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." We stayed like that for a long time. Slowly, my breathing started to match hers. My heart rate began to slow. The panic didn't completely disappear, but it became manageable. It became something I could live with, as long as she was holding me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "Why do you care so much?" She was quiet for so long that I thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she said, "Because I love you, Mackenzie. I love you so much that it scares me sometimes." My entire body went still. "What?" "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for months," she continued, her voice soft and vulnerable in the darkness. "But I was afraid. I was afraid that if you knew, you'd pull away, that you'd be uncomfortable around me, that I'd lose you." "You love me?" I turned around to face her, even though I couldn't see her in the darkness. "Like, romantically? Like I'm completely in love with you and have been for probably the last 1.5 years," she said. "Like every time you laugh, I feel like my chest is going to explode. Like I'd do anything to make you happy. Like I wanted to bring you out here not just to help you face your fear of the dark, but because I wanted you to know that I'm here for you, that I'll always be here for you, that the darkness doesn't matter as long as we're together." I kissed her before she could say anything else. It was clumsy and desperate and probably not very good, but it was the most honest thing I'd ever done. When we broke apart, I was crying. "I love you too," I said. "I've been in love with you for so long, and I was so afraid you'd never feel the same way." "I feel the same way," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I feel exactly the same way." We spent the rest of the night holding each other, talking and kissing and just existing in the darkness together. And for the first time in my life, the darkness didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a sanctuary. It felt like home. The sun came up slowly over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I woke up to find Sienna still wrapped around me, her face peaceful in sleep. For a moment, I just watched her, unable to believe that this was real, that she loved me, that I wasn't alone anymore. When she woke up, the first thing she did was kiss me. It was soft and gentle and full of promise. "Good morning," she murmured against my lips. "Good morning," I replied. "Last night was real, right? I didn't dream it?" "It was real," she said, pulling back to look at me. "Every word. I meant every single word." We spent the rest of the morning in bed, talking and kissing, and just enjoying the feeling of being close to each other. Eventually, we got up and made breakfast, and Sienna suggested we take another walk around the lake. "In the daylight?" I asked, teasing her. "In the daylight," she confirmed. "But also, I want to come back tonight. I want to sit by the fire with you and watch the stars come out. I want to experience the darkness with you, but this time as something beautiful instead of something scary." "Okay," I said. "Let's do that." The walk was incredible. The mountains were even more stunning in the daylight, and I found myself actually enjoying the hike instead of just enduring it. Sienna held my hand the entire time, and every time she squeezed it, I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude that she'd pushed me to come on this trip. Gratitude that she'd been brave enough to tell me how she felt. Gratitude that I'd finally found someone who loved me, fear and all. That evening, we built another fire and sat watching the sunset. The darkness came gradually this time, and instead of panicking, I found myself leaning into it. Sienna had her arm around me, and I had my head on her shoulder, and we were watching the stars come out one by one. "I'm still afraid," I admitted. "The darkness still scares me." "I know," she said. "But you're not alone in it anymore, and that makes all the difference." We stayed outside until the fire burned down to embers, talking about our future, about moving in together, about the novel I was finally going to finish, about all the adventures we were going to have together. And as the night deepened around us, I realized something profound. The darkness had never been my real enemy. My real enemy had been loneliness. My real enemy had been the fear that nobody would ever love me enough to stay. But Sienna was staying. She was holding me through the darkness, and she was promising to keep holding me for as long as I needed her to. On our last night at the cabin, I didn't need the light on to fall asleep. I fell asleep in Sienna's arms, in the darkness, and I slept better than I had in years. The nightmares didn't come. The panic didn't return. There was just peace and safety, and the knowledge that I was loved. When we drove back to Vancouver the next day, everything felt different. The city looked the same, but I felt transformed. I was still afraid of the dark sometimes. That fear wasn't going to disappear overnight. But I had someone to face it with. Someone who loved me. Someone who believed in me. 3 months later, I finished my novel. Sienna was the first person to read it, and she cried at the ending. A month after that, I got an agent. 6 months after that, the book was picked up by a publisher. But the real victory wasn't the book deal. The real victory was the night I realized I could sleep with the lights off. Not because my fear had completely disappeared, but because I'd learned that fear doesn't have to control you. Love can be stronger than fear. Connection can be stronger than isolation. And sometimes, the person who helps you face your darkness becomes the light that guides you through it. Sienna and I moved in together a year after that camping trip. We adopted a cat named Ember, who has absolutely no fear of the dark and spends most of his time judging us for our various anxieties. We're talking about getting married, about building a life together, about all the adventures we're going to have. And sometimes, on nights when my anxiety flares up and the darkness feels overwhelming, Sienna will hold me just like she did that first night in the cabin. She'll remind me that I'm not alone, that I'm safe, that love is stronger than fear. The darkness doesn't scare me anymore. Not really. Because I learned that darkness is just the absence of light. And as long as I have Sienna, I'll never be in complete darkness again. She is my light. She is my refuge. She is my home. And that's the real story of that camping trip. Not about conquering a phobia, though I did that too, but about finding someone who loves you so completely that they're willing to sit with you in the darkness until you're ready to step back into the light. That's the kind of love that changes everything.